So I would like to make a quick talk about translational research and the progress, and which are basically the roadblocks, the hurdles to therapy for CMT, kind of exploiting your experience. So
yes.
I will start with the first question. So, it relates to translational gap between research and therapy. Which are the hurdles you see in this specific topic?
Well, we see this in many diseases, I think, because basic science is sometimes playing on an island, and that's nothing wrong, because it's a complete different and difficult effort. And they dig into the genes, into the mechanisms of action, which is important. We should do that. But never forget why we do it. The ultimate outcome is to bring this to some conclusions for new drugs, new mechanisms of action for treating a drug, and of course, ultimately to improve the patient. And that means that even also in basic science, we, in time, not waiting until we found the miracle, we have already to collaborate with clinicians that see the patients, and I think also with patients, because they will tell you what the most important thing is to achieve.
Yeah, but do you reckon that talking about rare disease like CMT could be minus in this case?
Yeah. Well, you know, a rare disease as such is a bigger challenge than a prevalent disease, a very prevalent disease. But never be desperate. Huh? And also, a rare disease is a rare disease sometimes also because we don't look enough to cases. When I understood from the presentations here, sometimes a disease diagnosis is delayed for 16 years, if I remember. So that means that we have missed it. Yeah? And why is this? Well, I have in my specialty, I did a lot of research on early detection, early diagnosis. And one of the important factors that delay diagnosis is actually the patient. And why? Because as patients, when we have symptoms, we attribute symptoms to some things externally. It means heavy work, bad sleep. This causes my symptoms. And this is not necessarily true. And of course, that is an important factor in delay. And we show that people that have this attribution attitude delay their diagnosis much longer than others. And the most important thing is, because we cannot touch these patients at that stage, that the GPs, for instance, should not take over this attribution. They should properly evaluate, examine the patient, and not necessarily go with this attribution.
Yeah, you're definitely right. So you might have learned during these days that there is not just one CMT. There are 130 genes and almost 200 subtypes. So this is definitely harder. What's your experience with?
Well, yes, of course. This is. I understood there are many genes that can be involved, that will be involved, and that it will probably be related to different parts of disease, severe, more severe, less severe, and so on, touching other systems and so on. So the most important thing is, when it's complicated, do not lose yourself in the complicated situation. Because if you stay in this complication, you will never find out. Yeah? Try to make it easy and build. Make it a positive thing. And even a disease like where I'm interested in, rheumatoid arthritis, you know, I never see similar patients. And we see patients that respond to one drug and not to another, and vice versa. So there are, even in other diseases, even in diseases where we do not know in detail the genetics, we see differences. And even in those patients, it is better to treat them and to do kind of trial and error than to wait for the ultimate thing, that there's one gene and there is one therapy. This will never happen, I think.
It would never work. Definitely would never work. So during industrial and regulatory barrier, for instance, we are facing the issue of having some good drug candidates that do not go to the market, don't reach the market because we don't have solid outcome measure.
Yeah, well, going to the market has to do with several things. That means that first you need to clearly establish the problem. It means make it open for the public, for the payers, for the government, for other doctors, other specialists, make it clear what it is. Because, you know, CMT, what is CMT? But when you could convince people that it's a severe disease, that it could be positive, probably crippling, that it would be associated with high costs for treatment, high cost of not being able to work anymore, high cost for, let's say, family support, high cost for whatever, then payers would be perhaps say, okay, let's do it. And of course, payers, I think, are very sensitive to that. And I think we should convince industry much more to focus on the real thing. Yeah. Because they are mainly focusing on quick wins with stock market and so on. And they should be convinced that some diseases needs more work.
Definitely. So how much important are biomarkers for clinical trial success?
Well, biomarkers, well, first of all, I think you should measure patients. That means you should not say, how are you? You should really evaluate and measure what is the problem. That's one. Secondly, biomarkers, we always think, well, we see patient and now we have one biomarker and this biomarker will need this drug and so this will be predictive of response of this. In rheumatology, I can tell you that the best biomarker currently, and we have of course many drugs, the best biomarker is the result, the efficacy within the first 2-3 months. We collected liters of urine and blood and sera and whatever during all these trials to find out what predictive factors could be. We couldn't find it. There's also always false negative, false positive. Yeah? 2, the best predictor at all is how does the patient react on the first treatment challenge. If he or she reacts within 3 months, you're fine. If the patient is not reacting the first 2-3 months, this is the best biomarker. And of course you should do decent work to try to substantiate it, but this is very difficult.
Yeah, it is difficult, especially for CMT, because of the slow progression of the disease, which is a good point. But
slow progression is one thing, and that makes that you need to use outcome markers that are very sensitive to change. Exactly. Which is always a problem. Well, some outcome markers are, let's say, influenced, biased by other things and do not perform, certainly if the disease is slowly evaluating. So this is a real challenge, but you know, never be desperate, try to find out.
No.
And listen to the patient. Because the patient sometimes tells you more than any technical or lab or X-ray biomarker.
Yeah, definitely. As patients, we are way optimistic about this, and thank you for your insight about this process.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, real pleasure.
Thank you.